Welcome to Stress-Free IEP. You do not need to do it all alone. With your host, Frances Schefter, Principal of Schefter Law. You can get more details and catch prior episodes at www.schefterlaw.com. The Stress-Free IEP video podcast is also posted on YouTube and LinkedIn, and you can listen to episodes through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Now, here's the host of Stress-Free IEP, Frances Schefter.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our show. I am so excited about our next guest, and I know I say that often, but this one is even more because I knew Dr. Stixrud of him before I even knew him, just by his reports that I've come across over the last years. So I was excited when he agreed to be a guest on my show. Dr. Stixrud is also a well-known author, a lot of great books, The Self-Driven Child and What Do You Say? So Dr. Stixrud, please introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a clinical neuropsychologist, and I've been testing kids who are struggling in any way, whether they have learning disabilities or ADHD or anxiety or autism. And I'm just trying to figure out what's wrong, what's right, and how to help them. And I've been doing it for 40 years and never get tired of it. I still love doing it. And my friend Ned Johnson and I wrote the book, What Do You Say, or The Self-Driven Child in 2018 about why it's so important for young people to have a sense of control of their own lives. And we wrote a second book, What Do You Say, talking with kids to build motivation, stress tolerance, and a happy home, to give parents a lot of the language, ways to communicate with kids in a lot of specific language that we found to be effective in communicating with kids in our work over the last many years.
So giving your children self-control, of course, as a parent, I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Like how much are we talking about here? Like what does that mean?
So we got to a sense of control in part because the last 15 years or so, people have been talking about a mental health crisis in young people. And it turns out that all the mental health problems, whether it's anxiety disorder or depression or something, they're all stress-related problems. They have to do with a dysregulated stress response, an overly sensitive and overly reactive stress response, that fight or flight response. And I learned in 2008, Francis, that there's I was at a lecture and a neuroscientist said, who studies stress, that I defy you to think of anything that makes life stressful that doesn't involve the acronym NUTS. The idea of stress makes you nuts. And it's novelty, new situations, unpredictability, perceived threat, whether it's psychological or physical threat, and a low sense of control. And all the stress scientists say it's that low sense of control it's the most stressful thing you can experience. And so if we figured if these problems we have an epidemic, and just recently, the the Surgeon General said that the status of mental health in adolescence is the defining public health crisis of our lifetime. And it turns out that it's even worse in 18 to 25-year-olds. So we're figuring if these are all stress-related problems, and a low sense of control is really at the root of mental health problems. Because if you're anxious, your thinking's out of control. You'd like to stop worrying, but you can't. If you're depressed, you have no sense of control. So we thought it's hugely related to mental health. And also, every place that we looked to try to understand how do kids become self-motivated, all the arrows point in the direction of autonomy. They have to have a sense that this is my life. So that's the basic, that's how we got to a sense of control, was through this mental health connection and also the motivation connection. And I used to lecture about like 15 or 20 topics, and now I almost always lecture about this topic because I don't know anything other than letting kids know that they're deeply loved. I don't know there's anything more important.
It's, I love that you say that because my 9-year-old, everybody that's heard me talk about her is very strong-willed. My 6-year-old also, but not quite as strong-willed as my 9-year-old. And she says all the time, "It's my life." I'm like, yes, you're 9.
Well, I think one of the questions we deal with, in fact, when we sent the self-driven child into our agent to see if he wanted the book, they wanted to represent the book. The title was "It's My Life," and the question: when does it become your kid's life? My sense is pretty early on. You can't from the time that they're infant, you can't make them do anything. You can't make a child do anything,
Right.
and you can't make a failure to thrive infant eat. You can feed them, but you can't make them eat. And a 3-year-old who's refusing something, you can pick him up, and you can do it for. You can make him do it that way. You can't get him. You can't make him do it.
Right.
And so you make peace with that. You think, well, okay, they really. And anyway, you have 2 kids, and they're very different. And we realize they really have a different kind of life path. And I think respecting that from the time that they're little is really valuable and doable. I was talking about the self-driven child before the pandemic, and this guy came up to me and said, "I did my doctoral dissertation on promoting autonomy in 2-year-olds.
Wow.
You want to do it this way or this way? How should we do this? What do you want to wear to school?" There's things where we treat kids respectfully. We treat them. I know that you have a mind of your own. You may not see the way things you may not like what I like, and we think that having that sense of control, it just makes kids much more motivated, and again, it just makes them much less stressed.
Which it's just all connecting, because obviously when I give her choices, I'm like, okay, so you can either brush your teeth or you can skip brushing your teeth. And then that means we need to throw away all the sweets and candy that might rot your teeth. Which do you want to do? What is a kid going to do?
Yeah.
It's that she has a choice, totally. But which choice do it's kind of right? Like,
yeah, with little kids, with the younger kids, you want to do it this way or that way, And I think that, and it's not the 5-year-old gets to be the boss of the family. Kids need structure, they need limits, to feel safe and secure. But treating them respectfully, and I use that word a second time, but like they have a brain in their head, they want their lives to work, and they don't always see things the way we do, and also, we don't always know what's in their best interest, because so often what something that seems like a disaster leads to something better, leads to something that we didn't anticipate. And so I think that that it turns out that some recent research is suggesting that the reason that cognitive behavioral therapy helps kids who have anxiety or depression is because it increases their sense of control. That seems to be the active ingredient. When you think about, CBT, kids learn how to talk back to negative thinking, actively talk back to negative thinking. They learn how relaxation to regulate their physiology. And they learn to go against their fears through exposure therapy. And these all things increase their sense of control. And one of the scientists who Steve Mayer at the University of Colorado, who we pay a lot of attention to, who studies sense of control for 40 years, says that having that sense of control, I can have some control over stressful situations. I can manage stressful situations, inoculates kids from the harmful effects of stress. And so in my opinion, it's a big deal. And we've been talking about this for 6 years, and people all over the world are reading The Self-Driven Child and seeing the value of supporting autonomy, that internal sense of control.
It's so everything's connecting with things. There's a physical therapist that was actually on my show a long time ago that does the Alexander technique. And in that, it's teaching the ready list, which is the biggest thing, which is the stop, look, breathe, tall and soft like a giraffe, so that you're centering yourself, right?
Yeah.
And
right. And just, getting a good night's sleep increases your sense of control. Meditation increases your sense of control, in part because Ned and I think about a sense of control in 2 dimensions. One is the subjective sense of autonomy and the subjective confidence that I can handle stressful situations. I'm not going to freak out. And secondly, it's the brain state that supports that, which is when the prefrontal cortex, the most recently evolved part of the brain that can think clearly and go into the past and future, put things in perspective, calm yourself down when you're stressed, regulates the rest of the brain, including the amygdala, that very primitive part of the brain that just senses and reacts to threat. And when it perceives threat, starts your stress response. And when you're in your right mind, or your kid's in his right mind, and they're focused, you're engaged, we aren't overly stressed, we aren't exhausted, we're purposeful in what we're doing, the prefrontal cortex is regulating the rest of the brain. And that's where we want kids to be most of the time. So thinking about it this way, we have two ways to support the kids' development of that healthy sense of control. One is through promoting autonomy, and one is through helping them nurture that brain state by making sure they get enough rest, by letting them have exercise, have effective stress management so they aren't chronically stressed and anxious. So in any case, it's a big deal.
Yeah, my daughter, she goes to that physical therapist, and the physical therapist has one of those toys that start like this, and then you can pull it and the ball expands.
Yeah.
And my daughter goes, well, it's like your brain when you're not thinking clearly and you're freaking out. It's like this. When you do the ready list, your brain expands and opens up and is ready for stuff.
Well,
it was like
I know. I mean, and what the way we think about a sense of control, in part, is what it's not. And what it's not is feeling helpless, or feeling hopeless, or feeling overwhelmed, or feeling resigned, or just stuck, or feeling anxious and exhausted. I mean, all those things involve a very low sense of control. So I spent the last 6 years or more actually thinking about and talking with people about how do we do this? How do we help kids develop that sense of control that's good for everything? I mean, people, you got parents in assisted living. They live longer if they simply say, "Do you want to have breakfast at 10:30 or 11?" You know, or that's okay. You want to have lunch at 10:30 or 11? Right. You know, or what time do you want your visitor to come? You give them choices. They live longer because the brain works better.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's so I mean, everybody knows as parents, we're here to teach our children and so forth. But how does this I mean, I guess obviously giving your child more control and giving them choices is help, but how, what is the parent role in this?
So what I've been recommending most of my career to parents is that, especially as the kids start to, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and older, they think about themselves more as consultants to their kids than as the kid's boss or manager or the homework police. And the idea is that this parent is consultant kind of idea. I'll tell you that I gave a lecture in Houston before the pandemic, and I happened to mention the name of arguably the most elite independent school in this area, the DC area. And I don't know why, but I mentioned it. And this woman came up to me after the lecture and said, "We know the school in DC really well." She said, "I'm a psychotherapist here at the Menninger Clinic in Houston, which is a really good mental health facility in Houston." And she said, "We know this school in DC really well because so many of the graduates get into the top colleges in the country, but as soon as they get a B, as soon as they realize that everybody here is as smart as I am, or as soon as they get ghosted or a girlfriend dumps them, they can't handle it emotionally, so they take a medical leave of absence and they come here for treatment." And she said, 201, they don't have that sense of control. They don't have experience running their own life. And from my point of view, our goal as parents is to help our kids learn to run their own lives so they can run their own lives successfully before they leave home. And so from that in mind, the parent as consultant idea has 3 implications. One is we offer our help, we offer our advice, but we don't try to force it on kids. Number 2 is we really support kids in making their own decisions, in part because the way you become a good decision maker is you practice making decisions and see how they go and learning from your experience. And third is we want kids to solve their own problems, because if a kid has a problem and if we don't rush in to solve it for them and they have to wrestle with it, what happens is they're trying to solve it, whether it's some kind of conflict with another kid or whatever. Their prefrontal cortex activates. And when the prefrontal cortex activates, it dampens down the stress response. Because you think about in your work, Francis, you have some complicated cases, but when you're coping with it, it's actually kind of fun. I mean, you're using your skills. It's when you don't know what to do. It's when you feel kind of helpless, or that's what's really stressful. And so what we want is for kids to have that experience of something stressful happened and they solve it, because that sculpts the brain in a way that whenever something stressful happens, they go into coping mode as opposed to avoiding or freaking out or being overwhelmed. And so these 3 things, we want to offer our help and advice. We want to encourage kids to make their own decisions. And we want, as much as possible, we want to let them solve their own problems with our help as needed.
That makes so much sense. It's just like I'm thinking about it, like when my daughter comes home and, like that she did whatever, something happened, somebody did something to her, instead of saying, well, did you do this? Like, well, what did you do? And how
Yeah,
did that work?
I did this exercise with a bunch of parents and a parent educator many years ago. And we made up these scenarios of kids coming home, and a third grade girl's the only kid in her friend group who didn't get invited to a birthday party, or 10th grade boy comes home and he just flunked a test or didn't make the basketball team. And the first thing we ask parents to do is ask themselves, whose problem is it? And it's not like your problem, buddy. And it's not like that, but it's respectful because we're wired. We have what's called a righting reflex, which means that a kid brings us a problem. We're wired to say, well, you need to do this, or let's solve it this way. And ideally, you remember it's their problem. We can certainly ask, is there a way that I could help? But I think or what you said, what do you think would help? What do you know how to do that could help you? I mean, that supporting that kind of independent problem solving is really beneficial.
It's also like I'm thinking of being, the CEO of my law firm and stuff. When employees come to me with a problem, I get frustrated. I want them to come to me with a solution or two options, like think it through. And so I'm just thinking, if we teach our children at this young age, how much as an employee, what difference it'll make.
Yeah. I think it's really true. And I see a lot of kids who, where the parents have just kind of done this. They really try to support that sense of autonomy, that independent problem solving. And again, it's not. We want to be empathetic with kids when they're struggling. There's times where they need our help. They certainly need our advice and our wisdom at times. But we don't want to lay it on them. We don't want to tell them a million times. That's not very effective. And again, if we rush in to solve their own problems, they don't have that opportunity to learn how to respond. And stressful happens. Activate the prefrontal cortex. Figure it out yourself, and then you can go into almost any kind of situation, and it's not very stressful because you say, "Well, I've been here before. Yeah, I can handle stuff." That's what we want kids to have, is that confidence that they can handle a hard situation because they have.
That makes sense.
That's the way you develop it. Yeah.
But how does that work with? So my child, it makes me crazy. My husband and I are the type of, if you're on time, you're late. 15 minutes early is on time.
Yeah.
And my daughter has honey, 5 minutes till we have to leave. Oh, okay. Like no motivation to be on time, to be where you need to be, or to get things done. Like how do you get your kids the motivation? Like how do you make them do it, basically?
Well, I think that it's complicated. And there are some times where you got to get out of the house and you just got to grab them, put them in the car. But I think that in both our books we talk about the collaborative problem solving process, which in the old days was called family meetings, and Ross Greene popularized the term collaborative problem solving. And what it is that you when you're in a good mood and your kid's in a good mood, say, let's talk about getting out of the house and so we aren't late. And you say, I know, and you always start with empathy. You always say, I know that for you get so involved in stuff that it's hard for you to remember, though I need to get ready. And for me, I get anxious because it makes me, I don't want to be late. I don't want you to be late. How can we work this out in a way that kind of works for both of us? And I think so. You work towards approximations of what would help, and you set time. Let's try a timer and see if that helps. You can certainly work out contingency with the kid where this is so stressful for me that I don't think it's right, but I don't think it's right. And so let you make an agreement and say, well, what should we do? If you say, okay, I'll be ready, and then you aren't ready, what there should be some kind of consequence for that. In the same way you said that if you don't brush your teeth, no sweets the next day. I mean, that you kind of work that out ahead of time with a kid. And most kids are pretty reasonable about working out the consequences. They are so happy when they're applied.
I now know what my dinner table topic is this evening.
Well, I just think that having this kind of conversation with kids in a way that, again, is always starts with empathy and try to understand their point of view. So it's not judgmental, but it's just saying that for me, it creates problems for me. And I think that most kids are willing to kind of think through how to do this, what would help, what would work for you. And how many times should when my kid, it was in high school actually, he'd come home and I never knew what my kid's homework was. I rarely knew what their grades were. They both got PhDs. I mean, without any academic pressure at all, because it fostered this sense of control. And but I remember my son has ADHD, and he'd come home, and if he'd mentioned he has a test, and I'd see him, dawdling on it, I'd say, "You want me to remind you? Kind of bug you a little bit?" And he'd say, "Yeah, you probably should." "How many times do you want me to remind you tonight?" Or, I don't know, 3. So I'd get by him to kind of bug him a little bit and to remind him of this test. And it never provoked an argument because I just offer. I'd offer it. And so I think that having this kind of collaborative problem solving, kids are usually pretty good at coming up with ideas, oftentimes things we didn't think about. And then you move in that direction. It's oftentimes not perfect at first, but you keep talking about it, you keep working it out.
It's just, I'm thinking about the buses, and what I usually say is, if we miss the bus, no electronics for the whole weekend. The problem is she gets there just as the bus is pulling up, or she rounds the bend just as the bus is pulling up. So she doesn't miss it, but it's like that
okay.
split
Yeah,
second.
Well, then it's your problem.
Right.
What was it called? The something trap. I can't remember what it's called. There's, I think, a Tom Hanks movie. Shelley Long is an orchestra. And she comes and she's just like 2 minutes, practice starts at 12. She comes 2 minutes before 12. And this European director says, you were almost late. And she said, in America, we call that on time. So, yeah, I mean, and I just, I have friends and colleagues who do things at the last minute. And I'm less comfortable with that, but they get them done. And if that makes me anxious, that's kind of on me. Unless they really are late. So I might ask her. I mean, I might suggest you ask her. Do you get anxious, worrying that you're going to be late? And do you think, would it make any sense for you to try to get there 3 minutes early instead of 1 minute early, so that you don't have to worry? To kind of share your wisdom about it.
And then it just makes sense because I've turned it into my problem. Because now, as we all know, electronics have their place and everything. But when you take away electronics, you're punishing yourself as well, as we all know.
Well,
and it just makes it worse where it is like, I love the idea of giving her that opportunity. Like, I'm stressed in the mornings when you're late and I don't want to have to yell at you and remind you. What can we do to change that?
Yeah. I think she may want you to remind her, but I think that it feels different. If you've offered, if that's part of the plan, if you remind her, 15 minutes to 10 minutes, or her to set a timer, and just kind of work out a plan, and then see how it goes. And if it's not perfect, you meet again and say, what do we need to do here? And I think that, but yelling, you don't want to. In my experience, arguing about the same thing over and over again is always toxic. For a relationship. And so with kids have ADHD or they're otherwise, they just aren't really oriented to time very well. It's stressful for somebody who is these busy lives we live. It's hard for us. But as long as she's getting there on time, I just like to reduce the wear and tear on both of you by kind of clarifying, how should we do this? What's the best way? Getting her buy-in. And if you're late, despite the problem, what should there be a consequence, and kind of working out the consequences ahead of time. So like that, how far is school from your house?
Oh, the school bus is at the end of the cul-de-sac.
Okay. How far is the school?
Oh, the school's a mile.
Okay. Did she
But
get
it's not safe to have her walk because there's no
okay.
sidewalks.
Okay.
Oh, I've thought that.
Fair enough. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay.
Although we could drive to her uncle's house, who lives 3 blocks from the school.
Well,
Which that,
yeah. So, there's always going to be stuff. I mean, most families, there's always this stuff like this it's stuff you got to work out. And I think that rather than one of the great classic books for parents is Positive Discipline by Jane Nelson, and she talks about the consequences, that the four R's of consequences. It should be relatable, meaning it has some kind of relationship to the infraction. They should be agreed on. I can't remember the R's exactly. They should be agreed on ahead of time, like that. There's a couple of them, but yeah. So I think when kids know that if I don't do this will be some consequence that I've agreed on, that they're more likely to.
Right. Because I'm going through my head because I've heard that before, and I know it was relatable. Realistic was the other one.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
It was something else, and it was something like
revealed was one that's ahead of a time.
Okay, there you go. Revealed. There we go. We figured it out.
Yeah.
And it just, it makes sense because it connects. I mean, we get in these power struggles with our kids, and I know we all do it, and we're not going to win ever.
Oh
because,
man.
Like we're not.
Well, in our second book, in What Do You Say, we have a chapter called the Language of a Parent Consultant. And two of the aspects of language that we talk about are, number one, is the language of getting buy-in. So that, it's not, my co-author Ned has this cartoon where the dad is holding his 2 sons by the nape of the neck and saying, by the back of their shirts, and saying, listen up, boys, and listen up good, because I'm only going to tell you this 1,000,000 times.
Right. Exactly.
And parents say to me all the time, I've told them 1,000,000 times, or I keep trying to get him to see. And save your breath. Well, so we always suggest to say, I've got an idea about that. Can I run it by you? That I'm wondering what would happen if you tried it this way. But what I say to kids a lot is, for whatever it's worth, and then I'll run something by them. But I want it to feel I don't want to feel like I'm laying something on them that they're just going to reject. So it's getting buy-in. And the second is what we call the language of no force, which is, obviously, I couldn't make you do this. I mean, all you have to do is flop on the floor. I mean, I couldn't make you do it. And yet, if you fight me on it, if it's really unpleasant, then I may not feel like, the way relationships work, I may not feel like doing something extra for you tomorrow or the next day or something. And I think that letting kids, I feel it's Francis, I'm often asked to talk kids into things because I'm maybe they'll listen to you, you're a psychologist. And I don't believe in talking kids into things, but I believe I talk with them about it. And very frequently, I tell parents, first thing say to them, obviously I couldn't make you do it. And then you say, but maybe it makes sense for you to try it this way, just see what happens. And there's a mother who came to me and said, an observant Jewish family, where her 13-year-old son was refusing to do his bar mitzvah. He didn't believe in God, and he thought he didn't want to be a hypocrite. And what I advised the mom to say is, obviously, we couldn't make you do this. We couldn't make you learn your Torah portion. We couldn't drag you on the bima and then move your lips. So no, you don't have to do it. We couldn't make you do it. At the same time, it's really important to us that you do it. It's important to your grandparents and your aunts, uncles, and your cousins and your friends who want to welcome you to the Jewish community. And I really respect your integrity, but not wanting to be a hypocrite about this. But you don't have to believe it to do this and be part of the community. And 2 days later, after refusing for 9 months, he said, okay, I'll do it. And then he negotiated. He said, well, I don't want to do it in front of the whole synagogue. I'll do it on a Monday or something. But he did it. And I just find like it's like a superpower of taking force off the table, because kids want their life to work. They don't want to fight with this constantly. And it takes 2 to fight. And if we stop fighting, then we're much better able to influence them.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I feel like all this stress coming off my shoulders. I can't wait to start implementing all this at home.
Well,
And
it works. It works.
right.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
does. The few times I've done it, I know it works. And when you think it through, it really makes sense of why it would work and
yeah,
why what we're doing, it's what our parents did. How did it make us feel when our parents did it to us?
yeah, yeah,
Is
yeah.
that how we want our kids to feel?
And saying to get when I first wrote about this idea of parent as consultant, it was 1986. I had an article in College Magazine about how not to fight with kids about your homework. What I suggested you say to kids, "I love you too much to fight with you about your homework, and I'm willing to help you in any way I can. I'm willing to be your homework consultant to help you figure out how to get it done or like that. But you're the most precious thing in the universe to me. I'm not willing to have all the stress between us over something like your homework." And I think really, I love you too much to fight with you about almost anything, because there's more effective ways of influencing kids than fighting with them.
Yeah. And I mean, that's true with all relationships, if you think about it.
It is, isn't it?
Right? Like,
I
'cause
know.
fighting with my husband, fighting with my siblings, fighting with friends, like everything. None of us feel good when we're fighting.
I know. I know. Especially if if it's the same fight over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I think that most marriages you have disagreements about stuff, and tempers may flare briefly, but it's toxic when it's the same thing over and over again.
Right.
And I think so.
No, it makes sense. Every morning we're doing that same argument every single morning, and
yeah.
I'm stressed, she's stressed. It's not good for any of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's funny. I'm thinking my friends that might be watching the show are like, "Oh yeah, you're going to give up control." I'm like, "Yes, I am."
Well, and the thing is that it's not, again, that we're like the guides in our family. We set limits, but our authority, we lose our natural authority when we get down the same level as a kid. We start on a kid's level arguing back and forth. We lose we have natural authority in our families because we're older, we have more experience, we have the money, we have always we can drive kids or not, we have all kinds of ways of influence, but we lose our natural authority when we got to lower ourselves basically and just argue with kids or fight with them, because there's more skillful ways to do it that don't rupture a relationship and don't make us feel powerless.
Right. And actually, the more I think about it, the more I'm thinking I have more control when I do the choice. Because if we're fighting, I have no control. I can't force it. We're just going to keep fighting. Whereas, right?
Completely. I mean, I realized I did my internship in psychology at the Children's Hospital in Boston. And I remember Barry Brazelton was a pediatrician there. He was the most famous pediatrician in the world at the time. And I'd hear about these failure to thrive infants in his ward. And I think Barry Brazelton, you can be Hulk Hogan or you can be Barry Brazelton. You can't make an infant eat. You can't, like that. They can't make them do it. And once I realized you really can't make kids do stuff. If kids don't want to get into the car to go to grandma's and they're 4 years old, you pick them up and put in the car, but they aren't getting in the car. You can't make them. Once I realized that I felt like it was so liberating, because the idea is if you can't make a kid do something, it couldn't be your responsibility to see that they turn out a certain way. Right. And our job, in my opinion, is to help them figure out who they want to be, what kind of life they want, and how to create the life that they want.
Right.
Yeah, and I think so. It's not that, and I think we have a stronger sense of control when we give up doing things that make us feel helpless.
Right. And it's letting go of what we think is the perfect life for our children, because obviously, I have a master's degree and my JD and stuff.
Yeah.
And so education is extremely important in my house. But if my kids decide to not go to college, I need to be okay with that.
Well,
right?
And I talked to a mother a couple of weeks ago who said, I'm so grateful for you. You're encouraging me to let my kid figure out who he wanted to be, because he didn't go the path I had envisioned for him. He didn't want to go to college, but he's in his mid-30s now, He's really happy with his life as a rock and roll musician. He does all that. He works for a lot of these nonprofits for these projects, and he makes enough money. He's got really good friends. He's got a really nice girlfriend. He's as happy as any kid I know, any young adult I know. And if I would have fought with him all those years trying to make him into who I thought he should be, I'd be miserable. And I just, somebody said to me many years ago, I don't even remember who it was. They said, the thing I loved about raising my kids when they're adolescents was every day when they come home from school, you get to see who they're deciding to be. And I just, for me, I just, I love the idea that it really is their life. It's their life to kind of figure out. And I was struck when I used to do psychotherapy, how many people I'd see a 40-year-old, how many 40-year-olds I saw, and I'd say, how can I help? And they'd say, I feel like I've spent the first 40 years of my life trying to live up to other people's expectations. Okay. Now I'm trying to figure out what's important to me.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
I used to, I've said often, like, why are older people so grumpy? And I'm like, because they can be. Right? Like, you don't have to answer to anybody, right? And it's finally when you hit that age of retirement, and you can be as grumpy as you want, because who cares? What are you going to do? Right?
That's true. Excellent. Yeah. Good point.
It's so true. It got me thinking what you're just saying about transitions and transition plans, and that's where I know in IEPs often. That area is neglected in IEPs so much in the school system. And
I don't
a
even
high school kid, what do they want to be?
Yeah, I don't even read this part of that part of the IEP. Yeah. Oh, I'll see kids who, have severe language disorders, and their academic skills the first percentile, and the transitions. Well, they plans to go to college. Well, if your academic skills, college is hard, and I think that. Or kids have they're going to be musicians and they have no backup plan, and the school doesn't really help them inform them. Here's what you're really good at, that kind of thing. So yeah, I don't pay much attention.
Right. Well, right. Getting hired by parents, they want me to make sure the IEP is right. And,
sure, yeah.
And, right, and get the transition plan, but whether it's actually done or not is a whole nother thing.
No, yeah, I do see kids who with special needs who have fairly thoughtful, where the transition people really need to help think through that. But I've also seen a lot of kids where they aren't worth reading. But
right, no, no. Usually they're not worth reading, and I rewrite them. So,
okay, good for you. Bless you.
Yeah. My special ed experience and my teaching experience, I rewrite IEPs all the time. It's just like, why did I let them draft it? If I had just drafted this in the first place, because I can take an evaluation and I know how to put it into an IEP the right way.
Yeah.
And that's not knocking on teachers at all, because teachers aren't taught how to write IEPs.
Right.
Nowhere in any my schooling was I taught how to write an IEP.
Yeah. Bless your heart. Yeah.
It's hard, but there are classes out there of how to write an IEP and stuff, and it's go and do it. Not saying that teachers they have enough on their plates, but it makes life easier.
Well, yeah, if you're going to do it, it's good to know. It's good to know how to do it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I'm just thinking about my teacher's days. I much more prefer walking into an IEP meeting in which we're all on the same page. Yeah, it's good. We just want to talk through this issue or that issue. But for the most part, we're on the same page. Boom, an IEP meeting's done in a half an hour.
Right.
Whereas when it's not well written and the parents either themselves or hire an advocate or an attorney comes in, it's like we have to rewrite it and we have to fight about it and we have to talk about it and just double the work.
Right.
So it makes sense. This has been so amazing. It's so funny because I do these shows and I have people on, and I always, as a parent of two kids, I always learn stuff and take it home and, like, I did another show. We got to do this. And I learned so much. So thank you so much for being on the show and sharing all of your wisdom with us.
Completely my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Stress Free IEP with your host, Francis Schefter. Remember, you do not need to do it all alone. You can reach Francis through schefterlaw.com, where prior episodes are also posted. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, and sharing the show with others through YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more.